On January 20th, 2009, Barack Hussein Obama entered the White House as the 44th President of the United States. By June 2009, over 400,000 citizens had signed petitions challenging Obama's eligibility for the highest office in the land. This is a story seeking an answer to a simple question. Why won't Barack Obama release his long-form birth certificate?
You know, I am a believer in knowing what you're doing when you apply for a job. And I think that if I were to seriously consider running on a national ticket, I would essentially have to start now before having served a day in the Senate. Now, there's some people who might be comfortable doing that, but I'm not one of those people.
If there is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible, tonight is your answer.
I will, to the best of my ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Well, I remember getting a lot of calls and a lot of emails, and like most people, I wrote them off. I mean, how in the world do you get to this level and not have the verification of the fact that you're eligible to run? I mean, it's absurd. I wrote them off, quite frankly.
Can you bring us up to speed on the various efforts in various venues to determine whether or not President Obama is legally and constitutionally eligible to hold that office?
This is the first time, in my lifetime at least, where such a clear, plain constitutional question is being put. And anybody who suggests that it ought to be answered is being pilloried as some kind of a nut job.
You know, a janitor in the White House needs to provide all of his documents. To clean toilets in the White House, you need to provide all of your proper documents, your birth certificate. And this guy wants to be the president of the country and commander-in-chief in charge of all our nuclear weapons, and he arrogantly says, I'm not going to provide any documents. This is a total travesty of justice, and this has to end today, tomorrow. We can't wait any longer.
Obama's birthplace is contested even by his closest relatives, his grandmother and one of his sisters. Was he born in Hawaii or Kenya?
The issue affects Americans because it's a constitutional issue. The people who care about the Constitution, myself included, don't want to say, let's just open the door to anything popularly today that people say, oh, that's a good idea, why don't we just do it even if it's not in the Constitution? Because that path is, why don't we just rip up the Constitution?
No person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of President. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained to the age of 35 years and been 14 years a resident within the United States.
And there was a break in tradition from Europeans and a desire to have the future leaders of the United States of America be born in the United States of America, to not have a heritage from birth to a foreign nation. Now that's a very important statement, and the founders meant it to be important. It was considered. The Constitution sets two requirements for a person to be president. One, they be 35 years of age. Second, they be a naturally born citizen. But the Constitution fails to specify any institution of government that is charged with checking that eligibility requirement and certifying a president to be a legitimate candidate for president. Even the Electoral College is not required by the Constitution to validate eligibility.
When I joined the Foreign Service, they required that you get what is called a copy of the vault copy of your birth certificate, the one that is on file with the registrar, originally prepared.
In Kenya, as you know, I came back with affidavits from Obama's grandmother that Obama was born, she was present, she claims, at the birth of Obama in Mombasa.
We have clear testimony. That suggests something. We need to investigate it. And that's what I was convinced of. That's all I've been convinced of.
I remember a conversation with Phil Berg. You were there when he was at the same meeting in Washington, and they actually sent a FedEx to Howard Dean and said, look, you know, before you nominate this guy, you might just want to make sure he meets those qualifications of the Constitution. If I had been the chairman of the Democratic Committee, I'd pull the candidate in and say, you know, is there something we need to know? Is there something we need to talk about? Fine, no? Then show me that birth certificate. How about that?
During the campaign, the Congress of the United States actually held hearings to look at the constitutional eligibility of John McCain, but not Barack Obama.
That's the difference. When John McCain was questioned, he says, hey, everybody, here it is. Done. You know, my father was serving in the military. We were defending our country. We were in a military base. Guess what? He qualifies. Barack Obama was questioned. There were lots of talk, lots of discussion, but there was never an answer. That's why it won't go away. They could so easily put it all to rest and do what John McCain did and say, here it is.
All attempts at verification have failed. Candidate Obama, and now President Obama, has refused to unseal hospital, school, and state records.
And I have written a letter to the Secretary of State of California, Deborah Bowen, asking what documents did she use to verify Obama's eligibility. And I was shocked by her response. She stated that she didn't verify his eligibility, and it's not her job to do so.
I had about a 7 or 8 minute conversation with Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And I'm not going to reveal everything that was said, but I will say that I just asked the question, whose job is it to uphold the Constitution? And we talked about the Congress and what their job is and what the parties are and what their jobs are. And what happens, though? What happens if everyone doesn't do their jobs?
The strongest democracies flourish from frequent and lively debate, but they endure when people of every background and belief find a way to set aside smaller differences in service of a greater purpose. I don't want to run auto companies. I don't want to run banks. I've got 2 wars I've got to run already. I've got more than enough to do. So the sooner we can get out of that business, the better off we're going to be. We are in unique circumstances. You had the potential collapse of the financial system, which would have decimated our economy. And so we had to step in.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
President Obama keeps rolling out one big policy change after another. It's all part of his master plan to seize the moment and remake the country.
President Barack Obama is clearing the way for federal funding of embryonic stem cell research.
A stunner from Detroit. General Motors boss Rick Wagner is quitting at White House request, one day before President Obama's announcement of a new bailout plan for GM and Chrysler.
In the past week, Obama added 2 more big ideas to his agenda. He signed an executive order reversing the Bush administration limits on federal funding for stem cell research. The president also announced a sweeping series of changes in education policy.
Fiscal year that ended last September, the federal deficit was about $455 billion. Now we are talking about doubling that to $1 trillion for this year alone.
We have had to take some extraordinary steps in order to shore up our financial system and to deal with an unprecedented economic crisis. And as a consequence, we've had to spend a significant amount of money.
Potentially, we've got $1 trillion deficits for years to come.
even with the economic recovery that we are working on at this point.
It's all about using government to change society in a manner that goes wider and deeper than any president for many years.
The capacity of the global economy to absorb that much American debt, to finance the U.S. government at that level, is limited. And at some point, the line of credit will run out, and we will be held hostage by the Chinese government, who ultimately will become our creditor of last resort.
The world's largest debtor nation becomes a bankrupt nation.
Yeah, I mean, Lou, this is something that is remarkable. The level of debt that they are talking about, $1 trillion, and no one really in Washington wants to talk about, well, what is going to have to be cut? Because these deficits of $1 trillion, that's not sustainable. So something's going to have to either be cut or taxes are going to have to be raised.
We've got a choice. We can keep on just borrowing and dump it on our kids. That's option number one.
We can take it from the wealthy and give it to everybody else.
We could have across-the-board tax cuts, tax hikes, what you just talked about.
Which it's not income redistribution.
Well, but the problem is, if I am sitting pretty and you've got a waitress who is making minimum wage plus tips, and I can afford it and she can't, what's the big deal for me to say I'm going to pay a little bit more?
Because
that is neighborliness.
The American public have a right to know, because all of these things that are happening matter. The executive orders cannibalizing human beings for spare parts. The fact that he is turning us into a socialist nation, borrowing us into 3 generations from now. It's the question must be answered. Is this legitimate or is it not? And the fact that it's been hidden so long, the fact that he was not forthcoming as Senator McCain was, and said, here's my birth certificate, here it is, take a look.
We have to face the probability that the pattern of events we're seeing comes from a purposeful intention to destroy the constitutional sovereignty of the American people.
Somebody, somewhere, at some court level, needs to have the courage to do what they're sworn to do, and that is uphold the Constitution. That's all we're asking.
Now, all Obama has to do, it's very simple. Just call up Hawaii or write a letter and say, you're free to release all the documents you have on my birth.
On June 6, 2007, Obama's campaign was issued, upon their request, an official document called a Certification of Live Birth by the Hawaii State Department of Health. This document is known as a short form certificate. On the back of the form appears an official signed stamp by Alvin T. Onaka, the state registrar. Among other items, the document displays the child's name as Barack Hussein Obama II. Date of birth, August 4th, 1961. City, town, or location of birth, Honolulu. Mother's maiden name, Stanley Ann Dunham. Mother's race, Caucasian. Father's name, Barack Hussein Obama. Father's race, African. Date filed by registrar, August 8, 1961. Hour of birth, 7:24 p.m. Island of birth, Oahu. Sex, male. The document also has a raised stamp from the registrar's office.
The editor of the popular website WorldNet Daily, Joseph Farah, is offering a $10,000 reward now, turning up the heat to anyone who can prove they were actually present at the birth of Barack Obama. So far to date, no hospital in Hawaii has come forward to claim Obama's birth. No doctor or nurse has come forward to say they were present, or witnesses. For many, the questions over Obama's birthplace is not resolved.
Certificate of live birth has been created at the time the Obama administration, candidate Obama, advanced that. I took it as a sign of a cover-up, because you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't go get a certificate of live birth unless there were a problem. The reason to get that certificate is you don't have the other evidence. You don't have the birth certificate. It was clear that the Obama camp had spent millions of dollars trying to make sure there was great concern about releasing documents. No one would release documents. I hired a private detective. We went to all of the hospitals in Hawaii that were claimed, that were in existence at the time and claimed that they may have been where Obama was born. We could obtain records from none of them. At the time, in 1961, and Hawaii, as you know, was just 1959 was a state. So Hawaii was allowing people to come in and register births without necessarily having the proof or documentation that subsequently would be required.